Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Friday Comics. We're going to go through a little more of my back issue comic books. So much fun for me to do, and I imagine that one or two of you who are comic book fans probably enjoy this as well, especially since it's unpredictable. Although in today's batch, I'm just grabbing these a handful at a time from a long box, and in today's batch is a little bit more predictable. Every once in a while in these my back issue mess, you will find a long vein of the same thing, and that's going to make it an easier video to get through. The first one is an issue of Superman, a contemporary issue of Superman. I think this came out just last year. This is the Brian Michael Bendis run on Superman. The writing is atrocious. All the characters talk like Bendis imagines preteen girls talk. None of them are in character. The artwork is really good. It's Ivan Rice, and his artwork is terrific. But what difference does... I hate it to say this. I read comics for the artwork, but nevertheless, if Superman and the Superman mythos, if all of DC is being despoiled by a guy who doesn't even bother to learn what the back issues are like, doesn't bother to learn the characters because he thinks he's a superstar, then what difference does it make how good the artwork is? And I admit, I got this thing for the artwork, for not only for Ivan Rice drawing Superman, but also for the cover, which is an homage to a classic Superman cover. The cover says "It Still Tickles," and that is an homage to even the position of the body is an homage to a classic Superman cover in which he's being struck by a bolt of lightning and he's saying "it tickles." So that pleased me right there. But this is the issue itself is just wretched. The artwork is as gorgeous as artwork gets in a comic book, but the issue is just ridiculous, utterly ridiculous. Part of this long storyline about a Rogol Zal, a creature that alleges to have killed the planet Krypton. So, and who knows if that'll end up being canon? Who knows what to make of any of it? It's just Brian Michael Bendis throwing toys out of the pram, and DC Comics just not stopping him. No one at the executive level of DC Comics saying, you know, these concepts aren't yours to do with what you like. You're actually just a writer. You're a custodian of these for as long as we bestow them on you. But you can't just destroy things, and especially not even be clear about it. Krypton was not destroyed by a supervillain. The story of the destruction of Krypton is a parable about complacency. It makes Jor-El the hero by being the lone voice calling for the Science Council to do something before this planet destroys itself. It is a tragedy, not an act of war, and so on and so forth. And Brian Michael Bendis' relationship with all of the creators that went before him, the violence that he does to all of the concepts that he inherited on the Superman books. This is just an example of that. I don't know why I got it, except that I'm an easy mark when it comes to Superman comics. But the next thing is what I was talking about. This is a batch of comics. These are all old issues of the Avengers. There we have classic John Romita Sr. cover with a being called the Collector. Some of you will remember him. Benicio del Toro plays him in the Avengers movies. In this, he is up to no good in Vermont. There's in Rutland, Vermont, there is a costume parade every Halloween, and the Avengers are often involved, or Thor is involved alone, and somehow or other in this town in Rutland, Vermont. This is a big event this year around. The Collector is involved, and he is disturbed when all of the revelers show up at his door in costume. And the revelers are saying what a great time it is, what a great time they've had here in the at this particular Halloween fest. One of them even says, "Yeah, it was worth coming from Heartland for this." So maybe Heartland, is that a place in Vermont? Maybe that's a long way from Rutland. Who knows? Vermont's not a very big place, but. This has Bob Brown artwork, which is a little bit disappointing, and Bob Brown is the artist for most of the run that we're talking about here. The next one has another great John Romita Sr. cover. The Avengers and the Defenders fought each other in a crossover between their two books for the whole of a glorious few issues, and it involved splitting things up and having an Avenger and a Defender fight each other. The Submariner was on the Defenders, Captain America was on the Avengers, and they were a natural pairing. These are written by Steve Englehart, not Roy Thomas. Roy Thomas was Marvel Comics' historian, in-house historian-in-chief, and would have written a very different issue of this where Captain America faces off against the Submariner. In this, Steve Englehart needs a constant reminder, a jog at the elbow, that Captain America and the Submariner actually know each other, that they fought in World War II together. It's almost like Englehart forgets that, and Roy Thomas would have made it the centerpiece of the whole fight. The fight is a little ridiculous, and the other fight in the issue is between the third-rate Avenger, the Swordsman, who's portrayed by Englehart as a loser, somebody who gets shot in the back, tortured, tripped, that sort of thing. He fights the Valkyrie, who is a defender who is also uses a sword, but she's 500 times as strong as he is, and that half of this issue is interesting only because you can see Englehart building. He's building a love quadrangle. The Swordsman is in love with Mantis, another fourth-rate Avenger, who is a mysterious Asian woman who's great at martial arts and who doesn't appear to love him as much as he loves her. Instead, she is kind of falling for the Vision, the Avengers' resident android, who is in love with the Scarlet Witch, one of the mutants on the team, and that causes Englehart builds that into a quadrangle that is really, really interesting, and it allows you to overlook the shortcomings of the rest of his run. But then Bob Brown got off the book, and John Buscema came on, and he was inked by Tom Palmer, which is a great pairing. Tom Palmer really takes Buscema in hand. Here's one with the Lethal Legion. This is from decades before the one I just showed you. And you can see there's the Swordsman, only as a villain. It was an Avengers villain for a long time. And there's one issue. Yes, here we go. Avengers number 82. Terrible cover. Look at this. Every single person is talking. Are you reading them in the right order? Every person has a word balloon. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. But I love the issue. The Avengers are fighting the Zodiac, a team of supervillains based on the Zodiac. They all have superpowers, but the Avengers are mopping the floor with them. And at one point, the Zodiac leader and all of his henchmen are getting away on a flying vessel, has taken off from the roof of a building, and Thor takes off after it. Look at that. Beautiful, beautiful artwork. And Thor he perches himself on top of the ship, and then he does what no other Avenger would do, and not just because they lack the firepower, because they're not Thor. He does what no other Avenger would do. He simply kills them all. he just murders the whole crowd, blows it to smithereens. And even at the time, back in when was this? The 1970s? Is that when this was? 1970 itself, yeah. Even back in 1970, I just love that. I just thought that was so great. Because that's what Thor does in his own book. Not necessarily when he's fighting the Circus of Crime or the Stilt Man or whatever, but whenever he goes to Asgard and he's fighting trolls or ice giants, he kills them. He doesn't wound them and then tell them go and mend your ways. He breaks their heads open. And I love it when that happens. It happens all the time, actually. More often than readers tended to notice. It happens that Thor will simply kill the villains while the Avengers are spouting left, right, and center when Captain America is saying we're better than that, we don't want to become what we're fighting, etc., etc. And then off on the other panel, Thor is blowing up a building with everybody inside. It's kind of neat. But anyway, then we have another batch. This batch here is the Legion of Superheroes. My favorite comic book team by a wide margin, no matter how much I talk about the Avengers, by a wide margin. A superhero team of superpowered teenagers 1,000 years in the future. And I got a lot of these issues up in Vermont when I went, I found a cache of old back issues. This is some Tales of the Legion of Superheroes, which were old reprints, really good stuff. Then an issue from just a run of Legion of Superheroes by Paul Levitz, sometime in the 1990s, I believe. 1981, sorry. And then a bunch of issues again of the 5 Years Later saga. This is issue 2 through issue 6 of the 5 Years Later saga by Keith Giffen. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. Just fantastic. Look at that. Huh? That really, really repays rereading. It's just dense with writing. That's just great. And then the last of this, believe it or not, we're only at the 10-minute mark, and we're already almost done with this comic book video because the last batch, this whole thing here, is Nexus. This is not Marvel or DC. This is First Comics. Oh, I bet it doesn't stay that way, though, does it? No, it goes to Capital Comics and Dark Horse. Crosses. Nexus wandered all over creation, which is why there's no uniform reprint library of these things. But this is a character created by Mike Barron and Steve Rude, and it is Horatio Hellpop is the name of the character. He's alien. None of this takes place on Earth, and he is empowered by alien gods with superpowered energy abilities and with a mission to hunt down and kill serial killers. And he's tormented by visions until he does it, which is why he often says that believe it or not, he's acting in self-defense. Here's a beautiful painted cover. And there is this cover embodies the kind of moral quandaries that the Nexus always brings up. The writer always brings them up. Here he's about to execute a serial killer. And you can see the cover right away. It gives you all of the stuff involved in a classic Nexus story, which is that the serial killer, in this case a general, is sorry. His position shows clearly that he is remorseful. The background shows that he has children who are terrified that their father is going to be executed, and we see Nexus about to execute him, because none of that matters. Nexus never lets the serial killers go. He can't let them go. He's compelled to kill them. And that's what this whole run is, these beautiful painted covers. Good Lord. Here's one where Steve Rude intentionally mimics the old Norman Rockwell's Saturday Evening Post. That's Judah Benjamin. This is Judah Benjamin. Nexus's faithful sidekick. These covers are all painted. And Steve Rude would often include personal details, for instance, his beagle. and he would often, in the background of things, he would often include pop culture characters like Kirk and Spock from Star Trek or whatnot, in these beautiful painted covers. And they just go on and on. There's a girl dreaming about Nexus. She has the Nexus comic book. And I would love it if these existed in some sort of really great big color restored omnibus, where these comic book companies, First and Eclipse and whatnot, were made to play ball in order for an equal chunk of the proceeds. I hate to think that I've held on to these issues, obviously, with these painted covers, because I don't think that any reprint series will do them justice. There have been Nexus reprints, but there's a character called the Badger. He is a think Deadpool. He is a wacky, insane, breaks the fourth wall, joking character who appears quite often. Oh, look at these gorgeous painted covers. Good Lord. Oh my good Lord. Just so beautiful. This is also a period where someone else becomes Nexus, where there's a new Nexus in town that is not Horatio Hellpop. There's Judah Benjamin's lovely wife. We're both bored. And then some of these go much earlier. This is Capital Comics from years before. And a lot of these have been just reprinted to death and gone. And here's Dark Horse Comics. There is Nexus the Liberator. I don't think this is Steve Rude artwork. Oh no, it is. No, it's not. It's John Calamy. And then we go back and forth, back to First and all. My Nexus collection is a mess. I haven't ever gone through it, but I love the character. Absolutely love the world that the artist and writer set up around this character. Just amazing. The fully adult characters and well fleshed out characters, really, really well done. And I was amazed to see. I've mentioned Comicsgate on this channel many times when talking about comics. Was once upon a time a objection. It was really a hashtag objection to what the Comicsgate people saw as the forced diversity and the intrusive left-wing politics that writers and comics were putting into Marvel Comics especially, but also a little bit into DC Comics. They adopted the hashtag Comicsgate and said, we don't want any of that anymore. We don't want you to call us Nazis. We don't want you to bring up Trump in comic books. You might be outraged by the outcome of the 2016 election, but we don't want to hear about it. We want superheroes to fight supervillains. We want drama. We want high stakes, but we don't want your politics in this comic book. And comic book creators, in response, first of all, the correct response to all of that was to ignore it. Except for the parts of Comicsgate that were pointing out actual incompetence in the execution of the comic books. One Comicsgate channel in particular, then called Diversity in Comics, would regularly, every week, point out, okay, here's the latest issue of whatever. Look at this page. Why does this head look this way? Why is there no background? Why is this perspective wrong? And there was no way to argue with it. There's no way to look at something like that and say, well, that isn't childishly done. The only reason that the comic book professionals who were doing that kind of work were able to dismiss this guy is because they didn't like the rest of what he said. They didn't exactly cover themselves with glory when it came to their response to Comicsgate. They called Comicsgaters Nazis. They called them the wrong side of history. They said, we don't want your business. Comic book writers for Marvel Comics, with Marvel Comics in their Twitter handle, going on social media and saying to people, we don't want your business. A pure example, if ever you needed one, that Stan Lee was no longer in charge at Marvel Comics, because that would not have flown for a nanosecond with him. But a great number of Comicsgaters, including Diversity in Comics, who went on to change his channel name to Comics Matter. You should never change your channel name on BookTube, on YouTube, I should say. He went on to change his channel name, but he still makes plenty of videos. And he and a bunch of other people from Comicsgate went on to make their own comic books. They went to crowdfunding like Indiegogo to make their own comic books. And some of them have done extremely well. Some of them have made, Ethan Van Sciver, who was an artist for Green Lantern for DC, has made a huge amount of money from his Indiegogo crowdfunded comic books. Comics Matter, Diversity in Comics, has made a huge amount of money from his ongoing Indiegogo comics, where okay, the industry said go and make comics and then we'll talk. So they have done that. Comicsgate has done that, and recently, Richard Meyer, the guy behind Comics Matter, got the Expendables franchise as one of his Indiegogo comics. The Expendables, Sylvester Stallone's movie series about washed-up ex-mercenaries who come out of retirement or semi-retirement in order to do what they alone can do, because the younger generation can't. They're a bunch of pansies. And a whole bunch of 1980s and 90s era action stars, Schwarzenegger and Dolph Lundgren and whatnot, joined in on the fun in those Expendable movies, and they're a tremendous amount of mindless fun. And Richard Meyer got the franchise for Expendables and is currently making an Expendables comic book with the full support of Sylvester Stallone. Kind of amazing. And although what remains of the comic book media, the part of the online media that comments on all things comic book, the comic book media has gone downhill considerably since the days of Amazing Heroes. Believe you me. I will tell you sometime glory stories about Amazing Heroes. It was an amazing comic book magazine. But the comic book media has by and large ignored the financial success of these things. And they also by and large ignored the fact that getting a franchise like the Expendables is a major step towards legitimization of Comicsgate. Sylvester Stallone could have gone anywhere with that franchise, and he didn't. And that made me pay attention, but I was paying attention to Comicsgate. I was objecting to them at first because they were mixing a lot of personal criticism of creators, what they look like, what they sound like, with professional criticism of the comics and the writing and the artwork. And that put me off at first. Richard Meyer on his channel, Diversity in Comics, did a lot of that. And it got my hackles up, even though he's very good at it. He's very funny. But it seemed wrong to me to do that. And at the time I also thought, well, even if it's right, even if it were right, it's still going to hurt you. Because no one's ever going to forget these things. And no one can take constructive criticism if you're also mocking their footwear or their aspiration to transition from male to female or whatever. If you're mocking stuff like that, no one's going to take your criticism seriously. They're just going to feel attacked. No one is strong enough to differentiate those two things. But I stopped with that personal rejection of the whole thing once it started making serious money. That's when I realized this is a real thing. This is a significant amount of money, even by the standards of Marvel and DC, the two leading superhero publishers in the world. So this has now become a noteworthy development in comics, regardless of what I think of how it's being done. And the success of the Indiegogos just kept growing, and so I have been paying close attention to this and to it, and also to the reactions on the part of mainstream comic books to this, what is now legitimately called a movement. And that interest was piqued all the more so by Comics Matter, Richard C. Meyer, because one of the properties that he got as a stretch goal in one of his Indiegogo campaigns is Nexus, a new Nexus story. Which brings me that close to needing to actually back one of these things, which I have not done. I have not backed them, and I don't follow any of these people on social media or on YouTube. I started out not following them on YouTube because all of the comics creators, especially at Marvel Comics, would just blockchain anyone who followed them. And I want to be able to watch this develop. So if subscribing to your channel so that I don't miss any video of yours means I won't be able to watch any of the reactions to your channel because I'll be blocked on all social media, then I can't follow you. I have to just remember. That's all. I have to make a mental note to watch you every time, to look for new videos. That's the reason I didn't follow them originally, because I wanted to be able to watch the whole story develop. This is an important story, I think, an important part in the history of comic books. You won't be, as I've said a couple of times, you won't be able to write a history of comic books in the 21st century without talking about Comicsgate and Richard C. Meyer. You won't, his name won't be, you won't be able to leave, honestly, in an honest account, you won't be able to leave his name out of such a history, which is kind of amazing. What an amazing thing that must be to feel. But I've drawn the line at subscribing because it would block me from their critics' responses, and I've drawn the line at backing a campaign for a couple of reasons. One, it seems to me that it would destroy my objectivity to watch the story if I'm literally backing a horse in the race. And two, not Richard C. Meyer, but there are all sorts of credible reports of Ethan Van Sciver and a lot of his followers. He has a whole group of followers who call themselves War Campaign and who are openly, they openly say that the only reason for their existence is to attack his enemies. And if you back his project, he has your details. He has your delivery address. He has your credit card number. He has your bank information. If there's even the slightest hint that he's just doling that out to rabid followers who just want to attack people who don't like him, then no thanks. That's another reason. That's just a kiss of death. No normal, disinterested, objective viewer of this whole phenomenon would submit to the chance of that in a million years. Apparently, it's not hurting Ethan Van Sciver at all. Certainly his his latest Indiegogo campaign is making more than any of his others did. So there must be a lot of people who either don't think about that or don't care about it. But I do. So I don't know what I'm going to do with this Nexus backup feature. I naturally want to see it, but that's the connection not only between these back issues and something that's ongoing, but also a bit of a Comicsgate update for you. It's a bit of an update. I've said before that I think the next big real story in Comicsgate would be the verdict in the ongoing trial, the trial that Richard C. Meyer is in with Mark Waid, legendary comic book writer, who Meyer claims defamed him and ruined a contract between him and a third party. There's a lawsuit. There's a federal lawsuit pending. And if Mark Waid loses that lawsuit or settles out of court, there's going to be another massive chapter in the Comicsgate saga. And I've said a few times, until the verdict comes through in that trial, there's nothing really here to talk about, except that there has been one extra wrinkle in this whole Comicsgate saga, which is the coronavirus stopped normal comic book distribution. Diamond Comics went belly up, started shorting their contracts or avoiding them completely. DC and Marvel suddenly lost their only distributor. Diamond was the distributor for Marvel and DC. Suddenly they didn't have them, and their shops were closed, and their printing presses were closed. And Richard Meyer, in his ongoing daily videos, said, well, I haven't stopped production. I'm still mailing out comics to the most reliable comic shop in the world, which is your own mailbox. I'm mailing your stuff directly to you. The printers are still working. My artists, writers, and colorers are still working. All of that is still happening. But for me, via Indiegogo, as an independent thing, not through a major publisher. And aren't you happy? If you're looking for comic books, aren't you happy that's true? There was a while there, from March until early June, when the only ongoing comics that you could get, aside from, moving heaven and earth to get a couple of DC issues, would be either anime or Comicsgate. So that's fascinating in its own right. So that was a development before the end of the lawsuit. The lawsuit may take some time. It's clear, as I've said, it's clear to me. I'm only getting one side of it. Richard Meyer talks about the Comicsgate lawsuit often. Mark Wade never talks about it at all. Mark Wade's lawyer is Mark Zaid, who was heavily involved in the Trump impeachment and in the Mueller report. So he's got a lot of other irons in the fire. But even allowing for the fact that you're only hearing from this from one interested party, it certainly looks like Mark Wade is trying to drag this thing out so that the expense becomes so much that Meyer drops the suit. And that is, as I've said many times, not the behavior of an innocent person. So who knows what that will be like. I will keep you informed. But in the meantime, I'm going to wrap this up. That was a big batch of comic books. I still managed to stretch it out to half an hour. We'll be back. I'll do this again on Wednesday. We'll do some more back issues. So I will wrap this up, and I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.